Good evening, and welcome to the 33rd Annual Faculty Lecture. I'm Mark Emmert, President of the University. Ever since 1976, members of the faculty have selected someone who has made a significant contribution to their field to deliver the annual faculty lecture. This is the highest honor the UW faculty can bestow upon one of its own, and it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Charles Hirschman. He joins a distinguished list of Nobel laureates, scientists, artists, musicians, and historians who have participated in this forum. Last week was an historic occasion for the United States as this nation inaugurated its first African-American president in Barack Obama, the son of an African immigrant. Our new president is like 65 million other Americans who either are immigrants themselves or have parents who are immigrants. This is a particularly relevant issue for tonight because Professor Hirschman is a pioneer in the field of interdisciplinary immigration research. Dr. Hirschman earned his PhD in sociology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 1972, and after academic stops at Duke and Cornell, he joined the University of Washington faculty in 1978. He served as director of our Center for the Studies in Demography and Ecology for 8 years, and was chair of the Department of Sociology from 1995 to 1998. He's currently the Boeing International Professor of Sociology and also has an appointment in the Daniel Evans School of Public Affairs. In addition, he is a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. It's my great pleasure to welcome Professor Hirschman, who will share with us the story of our ancestors, immigrants all, who have and will continue to shape the United States. Charlie?
Thank you very much, President Emmert. At least some of the things were true that you mentioned. It is a great honor to be in this illustrious line of faculty members who have given this speech. It's also a very humbling experience to be able to try to live up to those who have preceded me. For the last 10 years in the United States, they have been awarded legal permanent residency, almost 1 million per year. For most Americans, particularly those who pay a lot of attention to the news media, this level of immigration is thought to be unprecedented and unsustainable. Something drastic has to be done about it. But if you look at this graph, you can see the recent rise in the legal permanent residents coming to the United States. But you can look over American history. This graph goes from 1820 all the way up to 2007. And you can see from much of American history, immigration has also been medium or high. Indeed, there was a decade before World War I, from 1905 to 1914, in which immigration exceeded more than 1 million immigrants per year. However, these figures are both too high and too low. The figures at the present time include those who are admitted for legal permanent residency, but it doesn't include those people who are here temporarily, those who are working or going to school here. It does not include the undocumented, who are certainly here in large numbers as well. But these numbers also may be too high in some ways. They do not include people who leave the country. In the earlier era of immigration, we think probably about 1/3 of those who came who left, and there's probably no reason to think that a similar proportion does not exist at the present time. For this earlier comparison, there are also problems. Citizenship has always been regulated, but people could come here, anybody could come here from around the world. To come here and to settle and work was an activity that was not regulated at all until the 1920s. So these earlier figures refer not to immigrants as we define them today, but to arrivals by sea. There was no count of people who came by land or from the north or the south, and so these actual figures may be here much larger. Perhaps the major limitation of this graph is it doesn't take any account of the receiving society. In 1900, when we were receiving almost 1 million immigrants, the population of the country was about 75 million. At the present time, it's 300 million. So 1 million then had much more consequence than 1 million at the present time. This is a different chart that shows a different concept, not legal permanent residence, but the foreign-born. And this goes from 1850 to 2007 based upon decennial census data. This is not the flow, but this is the stock of the foreign-born. The line, the brown line here, represents the absolute number of immigrants. It rose in the early 20th century with the major immigration from Europe that was arriving at that time. It declined in the middle decades of the 20th century, and then it has rose precipitously over the last 3 decades, reaching a figure of about 38 million in 2007. However, I like the bar graph below, which shows the percentage of the population that is foreign-born. It reached a low point of about 5% in 1970, and it's risen quite rapidly, and it's now about 12% in 2007. But if we look back through most of American history, this figure actually was higher. It was 14, 15%. So in the proportion of the population that's foreign-born reflects the likelihood of encountering the foreign-born in the neighborhood, in the marketplace, and so on. So immigration now is actually relatively lower than it was before. Let me give a name to our current wave of immigration. We call it the post-1965 wave of immigration, named after the law that occurred in that year. In the 1960s, as part of the Civil Rights Revolution, we liberalized immigration law. Earlier restrictive laws were passed in the 1920s that limited immigration both in number and in composition, basically favoring those from Northwestern Europe. In the 1960s, the children and grandchildren of the immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe acquired power in Congress, and they decided to right this historical wrong and allow family reunification, not your birthplace, to be the major criteria for entry. So immigration began to grow as a result of this law and other dynamics that were happening at the time. To the 38 million immigrants that are here, the foreign-born, we have to add the children. Actually, President Emmert stole one. Said there were 65 first and second generation, that is the immigrants themselves and their children, which number about 1 of every 5 Americans. Actually, it's actually larger than that. It's probably about 22 or 23% has recent origins in another society. So this is a very substantial flow. It is also no longer regionally concentrated. A couple of generations ago, most of the immigrants resided on either coast in Florida, Texas, and a few other large cities. Now immigration is not just as common, but it is also taking place in rural areas and small towns in Illinois and Iowa and North Carolina and Georgia, just as it is in Miami, in Houston, in New York, San Francisco, and Seattle. So we really have a national experience. If we try to think about the relative level of immigration, there's about 1 million who arrive per year. We have 300 million Americans, so it's about 1/3 of 1% who are added to the population every year. A century ago, in the early 20th centuries, the figure was actually 3 times larger. Almost a single percentage point was added to the population. In the mid-19th century, when people from Germany and Ireland were coming, it was actually 5 times larger. So this record of high immigration levels is a very consistent American pattern of which we're returning to after this hiatus from the mid part of the 20th century. The subject of my talk this evening is the consequences of immigration, the consequence for American society and for the immigrants themselves. But before that, I want to say, why are immigrants here? This is probably a question that many of you are asking, and I'm not going to give a presentation on that. This takes several weeks in the undergraduate course that I teach, and I think some of the students are here and have heard that lecture already. But the law itself is insufficient to explain the influx of immigrants. We have to look at the reasons why people want to come and the reasons why we need them here. These are usually labeled under the criterion of push factors and pull factors. It's a common misperception that migrants come from poverty and they're trying to escape dire poverty. Most migrants are actually somewhere in the middle of the economic distribution. They're neither the richest nor the poorest. They have to have some wherewithal to be able to make the journey. Furthermore, they do not come from the extremely poor countries. Immigrants tend to come from dynamic, modernizing countries that are creating industrial economies, displacing people in rural areas. They're creating new opportunities, but not in numbers sufficient to accommodate all the people who are seeking jobs. So if we think about Mexico as a very dynamic, industrializing country at the present time, think about Italy in 1900. Think about Great Britain in 1800. The very same forces that caused people to cross the oceans then are the very same reasons that people move at the present time. The pull factors may be even more important. A couple of generations ago, most of the migrants were concentrated in agriculture. Now immigrants work throughout society. They not only work in agriculture, including dairy farming in upstate New York, places that you would not think immigrants would be found, but they're also heavily represented, in fact, perhaps the dominant population in Silicon Valley, in many parts of the University of Washington and other research universities. They are engaging in a broad variety of manufacturing and service enterprises. For much of the middle class, they provide our services from lawn care to child care to elder care to health care as well. Our society is very dependent upon immigrant labor, and it's hard to see how we might be able to survive without it. Just as trade allows goods from one society to move to another, and the media exchanges ideas from one society or group to another, so too migration redistributes population within a labor market from areas of surplus to areas of need. It is not something unnatural, it's a very natural experience. This evening, I have three topics that I'm going to talk about. One is the native-born response, which is by and large one of fear. Sometimes this fear is expressed, sometimes almost in irrational ways. But the fears behind immigrants are rooted in rational concerns. People are concerned about their jobs, their incomes, and they feel that migrants who are coming here may threaten their livelihood and their promise for the American dream. But the native-born population also worries about immigrants changing the society which they're familiar with. They think that immigrants are unwilling to learn English. They are wedded to their own cultural values. They may even change the identity of the country at large. And I want to talk about these fears both at the present and in the past to provide a historical context. The second point, actually the second point and third point of my presentation, is that most of these fears are based upon false beliefs. We have a substantial record on immigrant assimilation historically in the present time, and immigrants do assimilate to American society. It is neither automatic nor painless, but it does happen primarily as an intergenerational process. Furthermore, immigrants not only assimilate to American society, but they also change it. They have effects upon the economy, they have effects upon the culture, and the results may surprise you. First, I would like to talk about fear. This is a picture of the Minutemen. This is the self-styled militia that's guarding America from the hordes of Mexicans across the Rio Grande who are trying to come here. We can look at this and perhaps dismiss this in some way as a product of a right-wing isolationist mentality, but actually these fears are pervasive throughout American society. On his television program, Lou Dobbs regularly engages in immigrant bashing, blaming immigrants for every ill that American society has, from crime to disease to perhaps too much traffic on the roads. Politicians regularly engage in the politics of fear about immigrants, immigrants who are going to harm the economy, refuse to learn English, crowd our schools, and so on. So this is a widespread belief in American society, sometimes expressed in ways like this and sometimes more moderate ways. This is perhaps the ultimate expression of fear. This is the attempt to build a wall, not just around a building, but around the United States. We have a 2,000-mile border with Mexico. And even this grandiose fence, which is going to cost $50 billion if it ever were to be completed, will only cover a few hundred miles. The whole border with Mexico has been militarized heavily over the last 20 years. It's sucked up billions of dollars. We have a very heavily armored force there at the border. They have attack helicopters, everything that one could think of a paramilitary force. However, there's a sizable amount of research trying to look at the rates of apprehension of people crossing the border or the likelihood of people coming from Mexico, and it doesn't appear that these billions of dollars have changed either of these at all. Fears of immigrants are not new. From the beginning of American history to the present time, they've been around. Benjamin Franklin, one of our patriots and founders of the country, complained vociferously about the Germans who were swarming into Pennsylvania in the 1700s. He felt that they were crowding into their neighborhoods, they were refusing to learn English, they were not adopting our manners, and we would be well rid of them. A century and a half later, Teddy Roosevelt railed against the people of German descent who wanted to be German Americans. And he said those who try to be German and American are no Americans at all. They are traitors. You have to choose one or the other. These strong words were actually fairly mild to what was experienced by the Irish, the Italians, the Greeks, the Poles, the other Eastern European community as well. These are the groups that arrived between 1880 and 1920. Accused, again, of every ill that society had. They were a threat economically, but most importantly, they were thought to be a threat to American identity and culture, a population that did not have the potential to adapt to American society, and they would never become real Americans like the descendants of those from Great Britain and Northwestern Europe. I have a couple of cartoons that try to make these fears a little bit more vivid. The Irish were often characterized by monkeys or apes well into the early 20th century. This is a cartoon that was featured in a national magazine in the late 19th century. And so you have the Irishman and the ape. Of course, the Irishman has a face of the ape as well, looking at each other, and the words below it say that, that both are expressing that they're behind bars. The other one is behind bars. Here is another cartoon that perhaps is maybe less politically incorrect, but perhaps more dangerous in a way. This is a picture of Uncle Sam implementing immigration restriction. There was a campaign from the 1890s to the 1920s trying to close the door. This was not only supported by the Ku Klux Klan, this was supported by intellectuals, this was supported by progressives, this was supported by a broad swath of those people who might inhabit universities, who did inhabit universities at that time. Their solution was to try to Americanize those who were here, but more importantly, stop any more from coming. So Uncle Sam was putting in the quota of 3%, which was the first limitation. We actually lowered this, and another law passed 3 years later to keep the immigrant horde down to the manageable levels that we could moderate. Now, as I mentioned before, the fact that the Southern and Eastern Europeans did immigrate. There's a large body of data on this topic. In the 1910s, immigrants by and large lived in ethnic neighborhoods and cities. They were isolated from the rest of American society. There was very low levels of intermarriage. But at the very same time that these conditions prevailed, the children of immigrants were going to American schools. At that time, urban schools were quite good, and they were beginning to launch their careers. During the 1920s and 1930s, they were moving upward in the economic society. World War II was sort of a turning point in this period. There was a lot of literature and film that came out of the World War II experience about the foxhole that had the Italian and the Jew and the Wasp as well, and they sort of bonded together, and this sort of established that not only were the immigrants part of American society, but culturally they were not a threat anymore. By the 1950s, ethnic neighborhoods and cities were beginning to dissolve. Suburbia was growing. The children of Italians and Poles were moving to the suburbs. They were intermarrying at high levels. Many of those of you in the audience who might be of European ancestry might identify as Polish or Irish or Italian, but if you count the birthplaces of your grandparents, you'll realize that you're mixed. In other words, there's lots of European ancestors for those who claim this identity. We're not purely descendants of one group. This wave of immigrants did not only assimilate to American society, they changed it. The contributions of immigrants are often understated when we're talking about the assimilation process. First of all, they came to find jobs, And we needed workers at that time in steel, in chemicals, automobiles, the whole broad belt of the American industrial economy, and disproportionately the workers in these industries were immigrants. They helped to build the modern industrial economy that we now have inherited. In the 1930s, we think the society was saved. President Roosevelt and the New Deal sort of brought a program of reform that ended the crisis of capitalism, that integrated the high and low income groups in society, and ended the threat of class warfare. Immigrants, particularly the children of immigrants, were a very important part of that New Deal coalition that tried to bring America together. Immigrants were not only central economically and politically, they also contributed to American arts and literature and culture. Not only did they contribute their own ethnic voices, they had what culture was all about. Perhaps you know of Irving Berlin, the great songwriter who gave us songs, Easter Parade, White Christmas, God Bless America. These are the quintessential songs of American culture. Well, I call him Israel Bailin. He was a Jewish immigrant from Russia who arrived as a child, and through a combination of his biculturalism, of course, his great musical gifts as well, he helped to create a lot of what we think of as American culture. Rather than just give examples of this, a few years ago, I tried to look at it a bit more systematically, and I wanted to look at immigrant contributions to movie directors. Now, movie directors are a very creative part of Hollywood. They're the individual who has to take the screenplay or the novel that forms the screenplay, and then to translate this into an artistic production and tell the actors and actresses how to speak, how to emote, how to connect with the American audience. And I wanted to find the movie directors who are really the superstars. So I found through a database from the American Academy of Motion Picture Industry, they have a database, and I found the movie directors who won 2 or more Oscars. There were 18 of them from the 1920s to the present time. 13 of these 18, 72%, were either foreign-born themselves or the children of the foreign-born. The proportion foreign-born was never more than 15% during this period of time, so you can see this is a very high overrepresentation of the population that was contributing to the Hollywood culture that was trying to explain American society at that time. Now, I'm not going to go through all 18 or 13 of these movie directors, but let me just tell you about Francisco Rosario Capra, or you know him as Frank Capra. I'm sure you all saw the movie. It's a Wonderful Life, a Jimmy Stewart classic that's reproduced every Christmas holiday season. Well, this was a distinctive Frank Capra movie. He was talking about the decency of the common man, how if we just treat people fairly, society can right itself. He had a distinct genre, which was probably reflective of a lot of the themes that immigrants and others hoped America to be. Why were immigrants not only able to contribute to the industrial economy, to play an important role politically, but also to help to contribute to American culture? Well, there are several reasons, and I'm going to talk about them historically, and then I'm going to talk about them at the present time. First of all, immigration is selective. Immigrants are not representative of the societies from which they come. They are drawn from the most ambitious members of their society. They're the risk takers, the people who cross oceans, who are willing to say goodbye to loved ones in their home community and throw it all to the winds because they think it's possible to do something brand new. So they come here highly motivated to do something. Immigrants have a problem, however. They have their culture they bring with them, and they're also confronted with the culture of which they have to adapt to. So this requires them to sort of think in different ways. When I was reading a lot about these American movie directors, I was trying to read their biographies, many of them said that they were intensely concerned about what made Americans tick. And perhaps this sort of biculturalism created a kind of curiosity which, when combined with talent, allows them to make great artistic contributions. But this is the immigrant story. There's also an American story as well. American institutions are open to talent. Unlike many other societies in which the question is, who are you? What is your pedigree? American institutions, whether it's Hollywood or universities or businesses, often say, what can you do? And if you can do it, if you can sing, you can dance, you can do differential calculus, well, maybe you can help us to achieve our goals. So this combination of the selectivity of the immigrants, the receptivity of some American institutions, not all of them, I think help allow immigrants to play an important role in our society. However, assimilation was not an easy process. It was not necessarily easy for the societies, and it certainly wasn't easy for the immigrants themselves. They didn't really merge into a melting pot. Most of the theorists about this try to describe this process as Anglo-conformity. They had to fit in to a pre-existing structure. This is a slide that tries to show Anglo-conformity at work. And so on the left-hand side, you have the stage names of the Hollywood, at least of my era, maybe not yours. And on the right, you have their original birth names. And it's kind of cute to know that little Bernie Schwartz grew up to be Tony Curtis. Or Dean Martin of Martin and Lewis fame was Dino Crocetti. Well, this is kind of interesting and amusing in ways, but I have a couple of serious points here. One is that the children of Southern and Eastern European immigrants who thought could not be real Americans, their children who were unencumbered by their foreign accents and their cultures of their parents, actually did play a disproportionate role in bringing America culture nationally. However, my second point is they had to pay a price. They in part had to deny their heritage both to themselves and to the communities from which they came, and this has always been the price of immigrants and outsiders. Well, that was then. What about now? How's this new wave of immigration from 1965 forward, how are they doing? Well, I'm going to make a lot of generalizations, and of course generalizations are always suspect, and they should be. This is a massive wave of immigration. We have 38 million foreign-born, another 30 million children. They vary enormously in almost every characteristic. A quarter of them come from Mexico, but the rest of them come from all countries of the Caribbean, of Latin America, from all the countries of Asia, from Europe, from Africa as well. They vary also in terms of their skills and educational levels. The proportion college graduates amongst the proportion college graduate of immigrants is higher than that is of the native-born population. However, at the other end of the scale, they're also overrepresented amongst those who haven't graduated from high school. They're very diverse. They also differ in their legal status. A lot of the foreign-born are actually American citizens. Of course, some of them are also here without papers, the undocumented. We don't know how many there are. The estimates are that there could be 11 or 12 million, 3 million of whom are children, who every day live under the threat of apprehension and deportation. But the characteristics that I talked about the historical wave of immigration are actually very similar to what we're experiencing at the present time. First of all, the fear. I've talked about that already. But now I want to talk about the assimilation of the new immigrants, and just as the old immigrants did assimilate to American society, so too are the new immigrant waves. And so too are they making important contributions to arts and sciences and culture. Let's first begin with acculturation and assimilation. The United States, unlike most other societies in the world, is wrapped up in a belief that monolingualism is the be-all and end-all. We routinely pass laws that say English is not only the language of everyday use, but it must be the official language in a city or state. This is fostered on the belief that immigrants do not want to learn English. Well, I don't know about you, but I've tried to learn languages as an adult. I've spent so many years learning so many languages, it's embarrassing, and I have a very, very difficult time learning languages no matter how hard I try. Well, so do the immigrants, particularly those who come here as adults. For them to pick up a new language in midlife is not easy, and even if they become fluent in the language, they're always going to bear the accent of the country from which they came. Their children are a different matter entirely. Upwards of 90% of the children of immigrants learn English, and they adapt to it very, very, very quickly. Immigrants also are quick to take to education. A lot of the research talks about the children of immigrants not as a risk factor, but sometimes having an advantage in schools. Immigrants are often overrepresented in those who score high in tests. They're less likely to drop out of high school, given controlling for socioeconomic characteristics, more likely to go on to college. So they seem to be taking very quickly to educational opportunities. Universities in the high-tech sector, they are hugely overrepresented in all of the advanced educational institutions of our society. The ultimate expression of assimilation would be intermarriage. We don't have the exact numbers because the definitions of what it means to be a second generation differ depending upon the data source. But it seems that at least a quarter, perhaps a third, of second generation Hispanics and Asians marry outside their community. So they seem to be moving very quickly into creating a blended population, just as the Irish and the Italians and the other groups did as well. These are some data on language acquisition for the Hispanic population, the population that's thought that's supposed to be most reluctant to learn English, from the Pew Hispanic Center. And this is the proportion who speak English well, not those who can get by on English, but those who speak it well. A third of the first generation of immigrants speak it well, but you can see almost universally amongst the second and third generation know English as well, or not as well as the rest of us do. What about the impact of immigration on the economy? I'm going to talk about that and on jobs. I also want to talk about American culture. And here I have examples drawn from studies of family, of crime, cuisine, and sports. That's culture, right? In 1990, there was a bipartisan commission on immigration reform appointed by Congress and then the elder President Bush to try to study the immigration problem and to advise Congress on reform. In turn, this commission asked the National Academy of Sciences to pull together a panel of distinguished scholars to try to tell us the facts about the effect of immigration on the economic and fiscal impact of American society. And they tried to draw the brightest scholars from around the country, mostly economists. I was sort of a participant at a sort of a lower level, sort of the token demographer amongst many of the economists who were on the commission, so I got to see firsthand what they were doing. Their results changed the debate about the effects of immigration on the American economy. They were featured on the front page of the New York Times and many newspapers, and it changed, I think, the curriculum of many university courses, but they're still surprising, and I'm actually going to read one of the quotes to you. The findings of their study were the impact of immigration on the wages of native-born American workers is near zero for every group of native-born workers, white and black, men and women, skilled and unskilled. How can this be? We know that there are many sectors of the American economy that have become immigrant enclaves. Taxi driving is the most visible one, but there are many others as well. There is displacement. There are sectors of the economy that immigrants gravitate to, and gradually the workers in those positions leave and go on to other occupations. So the assumption is they're going down. I think in many times they're going up. But immigrants are not just workers, they're also entrepreneurs. They found businesses. Immigrants are also customers who help to generate economic demand. They rent homes, they buy them, they do lots of other kinds of things. And so they create jobs, they take jobs, but the net balance, as far as not only this study has shown, but every subsequent study, is that there is not a large impact, at least a large negative impact, on harming American workers. Now, identity. Now, my graphic here has apple pie and baseball, and this is partially in jest. I want to get your attention. But I actually do want to talk about food and sports, thinking these may epitomize what American culture is all about. And is there any threat to the Americanness of our society from immigrants? Well, first of all, let's talk about the family. The family is the embodiment of American culture. We think it's the building block of society, and all of our ultimate values are expressed in our family relationships. Well, there's a lot of research comparing immigrant families to native-born families, and almost all this research shows that immigrant families are more traditional than native-born families. More traditional in terms of their gender roles, but also more traditional and less likely to get divorced. Immigrant children are much more likely to grow up in two-parent households than our native-born children. Immigrant children in school tend to conform to school rules. They're more respectful of their teachers. They seem to be doing well in their status. Now, I don't want to say, my next topic here is crime. I don't want to say that all immigrants are 100% law-abiding citizen. There are immigrant gangs. There are immigrant drug smugglers. There's certainly a well-organized group of people who smuggle immigrants across the border. But every study that's tried to compare immigrants with the native-born in terms of commission of crimes, imprisonment, find that immigrants commit fewer crimes than do the native-born, controlling for, this is true within every ethnic community. Immigrant neighborhoods, by and large, tend to be safer, having fewer crimes than non-immigrant neighborhoods of the same economic status. What about food? Food, of course, is, again, one of the expressions of culture. And I'm going to draw heavily upon a recent book by historian Donna Gabaccia at the University of Minnesota, who tried to weave together the themes of American cuisine and the roles of ethnic and immigrant communities in creating the American diet. Of course, it's a bit of a problem to say what is traditional American food. She finds that there was regional cuisines in this country, Southern cooking and New England cooking and so on, but these were sort of a combination of both Native American foodstuffs and the influence of the early African population and the European population as well. These were Creole cookings, not necessarily traditional foodstuffs. But even if we can't identify it historically, perhaps we can just point to it and say, there it is. Hamburgers, hot dogs, this is what we mean by American food. And there's a lot of stories about this. One of the ones I remember was when the King and Queen of England, actually I don't remember it, I read about this, came in the 1930s, and President and Mrs. Roosevelt had to entertain them, and they wanted to show them what American society was all about. And they, of course, they horrified the American elite at the time by serving the King and Queen hamburgers and hot dogs. Well, sort of deja vu all over again. Do you recall when President Sarkozy of France visited the Bush family compound at Kennebunkport last summer? Out came the hot dogs and hamburgers all over again. This is American. This is who we are. We're not pretentious. We don't cook with cream, all those sorts of things. But are they really so American after all? Another word for hot dog is Wiener. And if we pronounce it with the German V, Weiner, Weiner is the citizen of the city of Wien, Vienna. These are Viennese sausage makers who brought their craft to American society. This is the origins of hot dogs, or maybe they're Frankfurters. Well, those are from Frankfurt, and hamburgers, those are the butchers from Hamburg, right? So this is, again, part of our culinary tradition that are contributed by immigrants. When I was growing up and I wanted to go out for a big evening, I went to a diner. A diner has a particular historic place in American cuisine. This is the place that looked like a railroad car and had a long counter and stools there, and this is where you got your roast beef and mashed potatoes, and of course you got your hamburger there as well. Donna Gabaccia writes that this was really popularized by Greek immigrants who were trying to break into the restaurant industry, and there was really nothing for the low-income population, and so they found that this was a venue for their entrepreneurial activities. TV dinners, we don't want to talk about those as being American cuisine. Well, they were the contribution of Mr. Swanson, a Swedish immigrant. Corporate America has been quick to figure out ethnic foods and put them into their logo as well. In fact, almost all of the major brands of American corporate cuisine, from beer to meat packing to all the others, all bear the ethnic origins of their founding entrepreneurs. Immigrants also feature prominently in my favorite culinary experience or food shopping experience. This is the University Farmers Market, where you can find me every Saturday morning looking for organic vegetables and fruits, and I often shop with the immigrant entrepreneurs who are very well represented there. What about sports and other forms of culture? Sport that's better chronicled in statistics than baseball. And so a few months ago, I asked Tony Perez, a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Washington with whom I work and a statistical wizard, if he could find out the role of the foreign-born in American baseball, thinking maybe something is going on here. And within about 24 hours, he brought back several graphs, one of which is before you. And this goes from 1871 up to 2007. And this is the proportion foreign-born amongst rookies who are breaking in by debut year into the major leagues. Back in the late 19th century, immigrants were about 10% of rookies who were breaking into the major leagues about that time, fairly representative of the immigrant share of the population. The proportion declines in the mid-20th century as the proportion of immigrants declines. And you can see it's been rising for the last 30 years, and particularly in the last 15 years, it's going up very, very dramatically. It's now up to 25, 30% at the present time. Well, what are these baseball players doing? Are they sort of filling in the gap somewhere? Well, Tony addressed this too in another graph here. So the blue line, this goes from 1956 to 2006, and this is the blue line is the proportion of baseball players that are foreign-born, and it sort of parallels the chart you saw in the last graph of rising from 10% up to about 25 or 30%. The yellow line are the all-star players. Now, the all-star players are elected by their fans and the managers and the other players representing the best of baseball. And you can see for most of this period, it's kind of a wash. They're sort of represented there in the same proportions as the overall population. But something happened in the last 15 years, and now the all-stars have almost 35, 40% foreign-born. The players from the Dominican Republic and Venezuela, those are the two largest countries. Of course, being in Seattle, we think they're all Japanese like Ichiro, but they're really coming from the Caribbean. And they seem to be pound for pound doing pretty well in the major leagues. I don't think that the American pastime is under threat from being weakened by the presence of the foreign-born. Well, that is baseball. This is basketball, and basketball isn't quite as well chronicled as baseball in terms of statistics, but we do the counts. There are 76 international players now playing in the national and the NBA from 31 countries, from the Caribbean, from Asia, particularly from Eastern Europe. About a fifth of all NBA players are now foreign-born, and here are a couple of quotes from the mass media indicating that the contribution of international players to basketball is pretty good. The smart teams are going after the international players, the team first, back to basic foreigners are changing the NBA. Now, these are not immigrants in a way. These are citizens of other countries who come here for the sporting season to play in American professional sports, and in the off-season probably go home. This is maybe more reflective of globalization than it is immigration, but I think it does reflect this receptivity of American institutions to look for talent for wherever it is. What about chess? This is also a sport, a cultural pastime of which we record the best of the best. This is the 2008 U.S. chess champion, Yuri Shulman, who hails from Belarus. This is the leading women's champion who comes from the Ukraine. In fact, these are not exceptions. 17 of the top 24 men chess players come from abroad, and 7 of the 8 top women. They almost disproportionately come from the former countries of the former Soviet Union. The spelling bee, another championship of which we try to look for the best of American society. These are middle schoolers. So here we have the 2008 champion, Samir Mishra, from 8th grader from Indiana, won first place, followed up by Siddharth Chand, who is a 7th grader in Michigan. Now, these, on the website I found these that didn't tell their birthplace, but I would bet they're the children of Indian immigrants. There was a story in the New York Times Sunday magazine that caught my eye a few years ago, and the author was trying to understand what was happening to the spelling bee and perhaps, and he said, in recent years, the descendants of Indian immigrants, less than 1% of the population, have dominated this contest, snatching first place in 5 of the past 7 years and making it more than 30 of the 273 contestants. He goes on to talk about science fairs and musical competitions and so on, showing that the excellence of American arts and culture are often received by immigrants. Why? Here are several reasons why the immigrants are contributing disproportionately to American cuisine, to culture, to sports, to other competitions of academic success. One is just simply a phenomenon of size. Immigrants and their children are almost a quarter of the American population. Even if they were doing average, they would be well represented in all institutions because of their number. We have the immigrants, and of course we have the second generation bounce as well. As I mentioned before, selectivity. Immigrants, they have to face the oceans, they have to cross hostile borders, they have to deal with unreceptive bureaucracies. These are people who don't give up easily. They are driven. The New York Times called them strivers. And of course, those who don't find a place in the American dream often go home. So the ones who stay here are probably, the most successful, even of this ambitious community. Immigrants also, at least some of them, tend to be very innovative because of this multilingual, multicultural background which they bring to it. Some people have talked about that immigrants are marginal. Marginal in the sense that they're sitting astride two different cultures. They have two words for the same phenomena, sometimes 3 or 4 words drawn from different languages. They know how to think in a variety of ways about how their society operated and the different cultures and societies that inhabit ours. I think this often yields a particular level of insight, of cultural resources that allows them to make important contributions. And as I've mentioned before, American institutions. What do I mean by American institutions? Well, some of the ones who I've listed here before: sports teams, universities, businesses, symphony orchestras. All sorts of groups in American society have learned to compete, to strive for excellence, and they found a group that is willing to participate. So I think these things have led to this outcome. Let me try to repeat some of my major observations from my address and to draw one conclusion. First of all, we are experiencing a major wave of immigration to American society. In my efforts to draw its comparability to earlier points in history, I don't want to minimize the present wave. This is a big one. We have 65, 70 million people of foreign birth or their children, double the size of the population of Canada. However, this is actually consistent with American history. In spite of all the fears and the immigrant bashing that we hear about all the time, all of the evidence shows that immigrants do assimilate, but not instantly, not painlessly. It takes a while, and for those who arrive from another society, they're never fully at home there. I've been in Seattle for 21 years now. I don't feel like a Seattleite yet. I'm still a Midwesterner in heart, outlook, and every other way, and though I try to pretend that I'm a Seattleite deep and down inside me, I know I never will be one. But my children and grandchildren feel quite at home here. The second generation, they don't have to deal with all the complexities from a place of origin in their present time. Not only do immigrants assimilate, that they contribute to the economy, to the polity, and to culture, not simply bringing foreign cultures here, but helping us to figure out what American society is all about. And finally, I want to talk about American identity. American identity is not simply immigrants. We have our 3 founding populations from Africa, from Europe, and the indigenous peoples of North America who have created a legacy that's still part of our life. However, one of the constants in America is that we have been absorbing immigrants for hundreds of years and making Americans out of them. And we are very, very good at doing this. Probably better than most other societies are, and we don't always give the immigrants credit for what they have contributed, nor do we give credit to our own society for allowing them to do it and allowing them to teach us what American society is all about as well. When the Statue of Liberty was put up about 140 years ago in the harbor of New York City, it was a symbol of Franco-American friendship. It was supposed to be a salute to the American sense of freedom. But immigrants have claimed that as their own. They arrived in the New York City harbor. They thought Lady Liberty was not there for France and America's patriotic linkages, but this was Lady Liberty welcoming them here. They have made the Statue of Liberty their identity, and in part the Statue of Liberty has become an icon of American society. But when we worry about immigrants changing American identity, perhaps maybe we're just slow to realize that this is our identity. The words that I'm trying to say were said much better by a historian 60 years ago, Oscar Handlin, who said in the introduction to one of his award-winning books, "Once I thought to write a history of the immigrants in America, what place could I put them in? And then I discovered that immigrants were American history." I would like to thank all of you for coming this evening, and particularly Patty Glynn, Tony Perez, Nick Farah-Shara, Gunnar Olmgren, Julie Miller, Jeff Palmer, Garth Olmgren, and Lynn Taguchi for helping to do the research that I've reported to you this evening, or listening to several of my rehearsals before this evening. Thank all of you and my colleagues in sociology and the Evans School and my students as well. Thank you very much as well. Good evening.